Hey guys, it's Quills, and I have always kind of been curious among other things in art, I've always been curious about what other people's setups look like, which sounds really weird, but okay, bear with me. I've seen a lot of those, what's in my bag videos, and as weird and as cool as they are, I think it'd be really interesting to see like an artist perspective of how they set up their canvas and hotkeys and shortcuts and references and desktop in order to like make art, because sometimes I feel like I'm doing something wrong or like I need to change it up a bit because it's kind of getting a bit boring for me. And I thought it'd be really interesting to show you guys like how I've set up my Krita and what it's like from my perspective of like setting everything up, especially for like a video illustration. So I'm just gonna show you guys my thought process of what's in my setup as a digital artist. So first off, I started digital art with like my old laptop and my old PC, which was very bare bones and could barely even run a program without it crashing every 2 seconds. So I upgraded into a better PC. I do want to try including the specs for that too, because I feel like PC specs also help a lot with RAM and how the graphics look and how the program runs. So I'm just going to show you my PC specs. I'm not really a big expert on this, but I know that my PC was about $1,500 Canadian. So maybe that'll give you guys like a good price point of how much a PC like this would run for other programs. But for me, who uses like DaVinci, Audacity, Krita, and other like high-end programs, they all work fine for me. There's no crashing. So that's, I think, a really good idea of like what things I'm working with in order to show these programs. As for my tablet, I think you guys already know that I'm still using Darcy to this day. I know I already made a video of like another drawing tablet, and as much as I did like that tablet too, I just could not stop liking Darcy. It's just really comfortable to work with now, especially with the remote and how like it feels on my desk, and I'm just so used to it, so I can't really get away from him. But I did change a lot of my shortcut keys, which I will show you guys soon enough. I've already shown you guys, but the cool thing about XP pens is that you're able to really customize your remote and your pen to like as much as your heart's desire. So here I'm going to show you my shortcut keys for my remote. Over here I have a blank canvas on Krita just to show you guys what I'm working with. So there's a whole wheel on Krita that I basically kind of just use as like a scroll wheel, if it will showcase here. Yeah, it's like a zoom in, zoom out, which I'm kind of okay with because sometimes I just, need to zoom out a bit. Have you guys ever had that feeling of like you're working so in detail of like an art piece and you kind of just forget everything else in the painting, so you kind of just need to zoom out for a bit? That's what I use for this. There's a button here that can kind of just change what the scroll actually does, which I honestly kind of just forget to click, but I kind of just set it as zoom anyway. But it also has like rotate, brush size, and scroll, which I think is really helpful. This first button over here is for B, which is basically the B brush in case I accidentally am transforming something and I just need to switch back to my B. That is the first button. Over here is the transform. I don't really have anything on the canvas, but as you can see here, after I click this button, it goes into transform, which is really helpful. The button exactly to the right of it is the brush editor, which is basically here in case I need to change something in a brush if it's not working well, or if I just want to change the opacity or ratio a little bit. But I barely really use that button, so maybe I should change it too. This big button over here is basically just the save button, because sometimes I just forget to, and it's really obvious to save when the button is like right there. Over here, the shift key, which I feel like I need to also change up because I don't really use that key for other else. But over here is the control key, which is basically like, the I forgot what it's called, hold up. Color picker, color swatcher, whatever. Eyedropper, that tool. I need it sometimes. So that's the middle key, which I use definitely a lot. This is the alt key, so this is actually a really good starting point for me to actually like go down what I'm actually using and actually see what shortcuts I use. But as you can tell, I did like change it up a bit from the last time I got it. Control Z, obviously undo, and then space is basically like a grabber for me, especially on Krita, just really helpful. And over here is also undo. I have 2 undo buttons because I'm just that neurotic. And on the pen, I have this first pen for the eraser in case I need to do something, and then this is the also Control Z. And then on the back is a eraser. So it's basically an eraser tool, which, you know what, that's all I need, I'm gonna be honest. I'm super clumsy in art, as you can tell. Krita itself, I basically fucked around with it until I found a layout that works for me. But the things I've done to Krita specifically for like my taste, first of all, I found out where the autosave is, because oh my god, when my old PC used to crash all the time, this is like the one thing that saved me, because I could not stop losing projects left and right. So thankfully Krita has a autosave, and I just figured out how to find it. So what you're gonna do is go on to settings and go to configure Krita, and there's a bunch of other stuff here that I personally haven't really touched because I feel like I don't really need them for my things to work. But over here in general, you go over to file handling, and I enabled autosave for every 7 minutes. I think Krita had it enabled to another time, but I just set it to every 7 minutes because that's just how much work I can get done in that amount of time. And I also set up a backup file for only one extra file in case my first one gets deleted. I have at least one more backup file saved. I would put more, but I feel like that's just gonna clog my PC of storage, so I just kept it at one. Other things I did in Krita was, apparently Krita has a bunch of themes, which I think is really, really cute. I was just looking around them a lot and until I found the one that I really like, and I've just used this one ever since. You can change it up as much as you like, but like this one works for me and I really like it. And then the other thing that I figured out with Krita is that how to change up the Dockers. The Dockers, I feel like everyone and their mom already know this in art. Dockers are basically like a window of tools that you can use in an art program. So as you can see here, this is the toolbar. Docker over here is the color select, and then windows. And the way I found this out in Krita was basically like going over to the settings and then just looking at all the Dockers and just clicking like all of them, like enabling all of them, and then just seeing left and right which ones I liked and which ones I didn't like. And that kind of just helped me at least build up which tools that I use the most, and then just judging them around to like where I like them, because the cool thing about Krita is that you can kind of just pick them up and move them, which I think is really cool. Like I could just move this to a separate window, or I could just like plug it in with another thing. I kind of just kept it onto the side of like the right screen just because I'm right-handed. It's easier for me to like go and switch out everything as opposed to like moving my entire hand over and having them on the left side. So that's why on the left side I only have the toolbar, which I kind of just mapped to my remote anyway. So that's why I tried to have my left side be as minimal as possible so that I don't have to keep like going back and forth between it. But over here I have the advanced color selector, which is basically the color selector that I vibed with. You could change it up. I'm gonna be honest, I kind of forget how. That's what editing me is for. But as you could tell, I went with this like square thing with all of the different hues around it and some variations of like black and gray and white in the corners with a really high saturation in the top right corner. And then below here are some different hues that I could just mess around with. I kind of just stick with like a red to sketch with. I don't know why, it just vibes with me. I think sketching with a color, especially like a color that you don't really use often, works well for me because a lot of my line art is very dark, so having a semi-colorful sketch underneath all that line art kind of breaks down like which you need to actually outline and which is just there as like a rough sketch. It really helps me differentiate which of the lines I want to actually show off, as opposed to just like having them all look black and then getting rid of the sketch parts and you realize that you've accidentally highlighted the wrong line that you wanted, you know? Anyway, I also have layers over here because that is crucial, I know. I try to be very minimal with my layers because I just get overwhelmed and I can get confused very easily, as you can see in like some of my speed paints, but sometimes I just can't help it. Layer setup is very different for every artist, and I know, but the way that it works for me is, first of all, I don't really like doing a white background. I think you guys already know this. So what I do is that I click to a black, I select the first layer on top of the background, I go over to the top left corner and showcase like the pattern selection. I click this one that I use constantly for all of my backgrounds because I really like the texture. It's called 5 Paper Torchwood PNG, and then I go to edit, and then you fill the entire layer on top with pattern, and then I just go back and have the opacity at 25%, and then I merge that down, and that is like the base background that I usually work with for like everything. Because we're working on digital, you can't really get much textures in unless you actually add them onto yourself or like draw them on, and I kind of really like the look of textures, especially with like paints and my old sketchbooks, and they look really cool with the paper texture. I just wanted to draw on paper somewhere so I kind of just enabled it in the digital space with another layer. On top of the background, I usually put a sketch layer on top, and I make sure to lock all of the layers that I don't really use because I am notorious for accidentally like merging layers down and then ruining an entire painting. So I try to stop that by making sure that I lock the layers I don't immediately use. And then on top of that, I usually do my line art after, just because I think that a lot of the priority in my art style is line art. I think a good line art really saves or breaks my like illustrations. So I try to prioritize that by making that the biggest thing in my art. And then if I do try to do color, I try to do it on top of the sketch layer just so that it doesn't really take away from the line art. I don't want to cover any of that up. And then if I want to be even more fun, on top of the line art, I'll add like a highlights layer, which is basically where I'm able to draw on top of the line art for like any cool highlights or things that I want to add that kind of just wants to bring the whole thing together. That's basically what my setup kind of looks like on a good illustration day. I know sometimes in my speed paints it could be really hard to tell because you just see a lot of layers and you don't really see them showcased or written like this, but I just forget to, but I know where everything is because I feel like that's just how how artists be sometimes. When you're in the flow, you don't really have time to organize it. I forgot to mention, but over with the advanced color selector, I also have an overview just so I could show off what the actual whole painting looks like. Again, I'm really notorious for accidentally like zooming in constantly and not being able to see the whole picture, and it kind of just makes the illustration look very one-sided. So I always make sure to have the overview open if I'm not actually like painting and using all these colors. And then over here below the layers and the overview, I have brush presets, which Krita has a lot, and it's amazing that Krita allows you to download more because this library would be even more full. And then sharing that same window, I also have the tool options, which basically lets you go even more depth of how each of the tools work. As you can see, as I'm clicking through the toolbar, there's different tool varieties and options for every single one, which I think is really amazing. So I just have that open in case I want to change something very slight. And then with brushes, obviously there's too much for me to really keep track of, so I always have my favorites that I've labeled down here, which I will kind of show you. Obviously you need an eraser. Easy enough. This is basically like the round brush that everyone and their mom uses. I don't really use it that much, I'm gonna be honest, because I really love some texture in my work, but I do use this to like help color or define certain areas. This one is basically my baby because it has a bit of grit if you look in for some line art, which I really do like. I really like the inky effect that it does, and it looks really cool when you like put it all together. I love the weight distribution with this brush too. It's just so pretty, and it's just my favorite brush so far. This one is also another like normal round brush, but there's like a bit of texture in it if you just like squint, you know? I also use that to color just so that it kind of works with the inkiness of this brush so that they all like balance together and it's not just like a bunch of brushes all together. I used to do that. That was one of my biggest digital art mistakes, by the way, where I would just overuse too many brushes and then it didn't really look concise and it looked kind of like jumbled and weird. So I do try to keep my brushes to like a small set that works together so it doesn't look too weird. This one, I kind of use this to color sometimes just to add like some shadow and effects, but it's really nice because you can gradually build on top of it, kind of like watercolor paints, but like as a dry marker, and I think it looks really cool. I think it's really interesting how it's also able to like blend out and stuff. It's just really cool. This is a like charcoal that I also kind of use to color, especially because you can see how it builds on top of each other, and I do think it works really well with the inky line art that I usually use. This one is a cool texture that I also use. It's kind of similar to the last one, but like a bit more rough and grainy, if you know what I mean. This one, I don't know why, it's not really supposed to be for painting, but I use this like square charcoal-y brush to paint a lot, and I don't know, it's just something about the square edge. It like adds a lot of shape to like even the smallest colors. Even if I go like this, like there's already some kind of texture in there, even though it's just squiggly lines with the square brush, and I really do like it. I don't know why I use it to paint. I really shouldn't. It's supposed to be like a charcoal-y brush, but it's really cool in my opinion, and I don't know why I use it to color. I should probably look at other brushes to color, but that's one of my biggest fave. Sometimes when I do line art lately, I want it to look very pencil-y, so I've been using these two like pencil brushes in order to do like very cute line art. It's just really cool, especially with the line art that I use, where there are a lot of like pencil details and you see a lot of fabrics that have this effect, and I think it just works really well with my art style. I really like it for sketching too, but like it's kind of like my all-rounder brush. I don't know, I use it for sketching, line art, whatever. It's also really good if you use like a very thick line art like this, like a very dramatic line art, to have even like background line art look a bit like flimsy like this, so that there's a big contrast between what's actually in the foreground and what's in the background. Stuff like this is what I learned along the way from using these brushes, and I think it kind of helps. This is like one of my only paint brushes, if you believe it, and it's basically like a wet brush that I like to do for some coloring and shadows, but it's just really cool how much it blends together as if it's still wet, and I think it's really nice to add like in backgrounds when you do like one of those funky little panels of a character just talking. It adds so much cool variety and texture as opposed to just like having a gradient in the background, which I need to stop doing. So I think I just try to use this more, and it works well. So again, these are actual paint brushes, and this one is kind of like a watercolor effect, and I really like it. It's really cool to build off of it. I don't use it that much because I think it pulls away a bit from the line art, but sometimes I do use it for like actual paintings. It just kind of brings me back to when I was like relearning watercolor watercolor. And you know, with watercolor, you kind of have to start with like the foreground up and then build onto it. And that's kind of what I get from this brush, especially because if you do try to darken it, you can't just like, you know, press really hard. You do have to build up with like gradual layers, which I think really does help test my patience sometimes, but god does it look pretty, and I do use that brush often. This one is also a really pretty texture one, and it's kind of like the last one except a lot more fast, as if it like dries faster, but it still gives that wet look, which I think is really pretty, and it's just so easy to build off of it. Even like the few brush strokes I already have, it already looks a lot more darker than the last one I used, but it also just looks a lot more dry. So it depends on what I'm going for, I guess. And this is the baby that I used to overuse all the time. I really needed to stop using it. But this is basically like the glow brush. As you can tell from the brushes already here, you basically just like draw over them and it gives a really intense glow effect. Obviously, like this is the wrong color for it, but it really helps when you do want to make a glow effect, which I honestly kind of want to stop relying on because I want to learn how to like paint that myself, if that makes sense. But it's really easy to like, you know, just grab this and like have everything glow, especially for an illustration of like a scenery or something and you just want like some quick windows or a quick light source. But I think I'm trying to grow out of this brush, but it's still here because I don't know, attachment. Over here is a texture brush that I don't remember why is here, I'm gonna be honest. I think I used this a lot for my webcomic and I don't remember where, but now that I'm using it now, I might kind of just like... Anyway, here is also a brush that I use kind of for texture, and it's basically just a bunch of dots, and this is basically me just adding noise myself manually. Noise, as you can tell, is like these little dots that kind of add the graininess effect of a lot of like screens and illustrations, and this is basically me just controlling it myself, especially because sometimes the noise would add like a color that I don't like, but sometimes it'd be really interesting to like do this together. Or I would also use this in my webcomic, the background, if I wanted like stars, I kind of just like have a black background and then just make these stars like white, and it was kind of just easy as opposed to me like actually doing the stars myself. I'll do it over here on top of this, but like you could tell that it's just a bunch of dots, and I think it's really helpful. And that's basically like my Krita setup, which is really funny because, you know, I don't know how I do this. But another thing that artist setups should also include is how you take breaks and how you set up references. And for taking breaks, I'm gonna be honest guys, I am a hypocrite because sometimes I will just be in shrimp mode for a good like 4 hours trying to get something done, and I really need to stop doing that. So what I did is that I bought one of these like hourglasses that you turn upside down and there's just a bunch of sand falling down, and I bought one I think at Chapters for, I don't even remember, but I'm gonna put the link on the screen, for 30 minutes, so that basically after it runs out, I remember to like stretch and like take a break and like walk around for a bit. I know in the long run this is basically going to hurt my back and kill me, but I do love art and I don't want to stop doing it, so I'm just gonna make sure to set reminders for myself by using this. I recommend you guys do this too, because sometimes it can just be really painful and your brain kind of does need a little bit of a break. Even when you're like in intense focus, it just helps a lot, help with that brain fog, you know? I know a lot of artists feel the same way, so just remember to always have like a timer or something to remind you to take breaks, because that is really crucial. For reference setup, I'm gonna be honest guys, I still need help with that, because I will show you how I do references, and it's basically just a bunch of tabs on Pinterest that I just click to like every single time. And I know that's not the best way to do references, and I'm trying to look at other ways to do it, so if you have any recommendations, just like let me know, because oh my god. Oh, another thing that I can show you guys, a cool thing that Krita does is that they also have like an animation capability. So over here, this is basically my like illustration station, so I'm gonna actually show you guys my animation station on Krita, which I have over here in workspaces, which you can like save and change around. So my animation one basically kind of looks like this. So I know it looks very different, but like hear me out. So first of all, the layers takes priority when it comes to animation, at least for me, and because I don't want to overload myself with colors, especially like in animation you want everything to be like concise, I changed the color selector to palette so that I'm just able to actually like keep track of all my colors and I don't get overwhelmed. Over here I still have my brushes. As you can tell, this is the animation timeline. I don't quite know what animation curves do, I'm gonna be honest. I used to do it and then I forgot how to do it, and then it's still here, so I'm just gonna relearn that someday. And then on my other window, I actually have these as a separate window. I have onion skinning, which I can control with these dials. It's really helpful just so that it's easy for me to actually differentiate which colors are which between in the future, in the past. I know it's really annoying, but I remember I tried an old animation program and their onion skinning was basically like lowered the opacity, which kind of made it confusing, especially with what kind of frames you're drawing. So I just recommend that your onion skins are like weird ass colors that you could see a mile away, as you could tell. And I also made sure to have my overview on my other monitor, but just very big so that I'm able to actually keep track of what the whole animation looks like from the other monitor. And I think that's basically it. That's basically my whole setup for how this digital art is going. Obviously, this isn't like the Krita video that everyone was asking for, which I am trying to make, but I'm gonna be honest, Krita is such a big program. It's kind of hard for me to like actually script out what to show people and how to show people. So maybe in the comments you guys could just have a bunch of questions that you want from Krita and I'll do my best to answer them in another video. But this is basically my digital art setup. I hope you guys enjoyed and I hope this gives some reference of how I work. And it could also be a really good jumping off point to how you want to set up your art programs, because I know sometimes with a lot of these it can get really overwhelming to figure out how to start with, how to set up your canvas, how to get everything started. But my tips are basically just fucking around and finding out. Or if you're like me and you do want a jumping off point, you see videos like this and see how other people do it and just seeing how they utilize their workflow and what tools they actually use. So now that I've explained mine, hopefully you guys have the motivation to like customize and get to know your programs a little more. Again, I recommend Krita, and there's just a lot of cool settings and dockers that you guys are able to explore yourself and see what works for you. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!